organizers of this event, to all the attendants, good morning. I'm humbled to be here as a 22-year-old, just supposedly 1 year out of college, to share some learnings about my experiences in my last 2.5 years of starting and running this startup enterprise. I also have to disclose that one of the agendas for which I go to events like these is that we're always on the lookout for some of the best young talent in the Philippines. And with a conference title like Asia Young Leaders Summit, I thought, hey, there might be some really great, high potential young people who might be interested in taking a leap out of the corporate world into a startup where they can make a disproportionately large impact. And I can talk more about the type of impact that I think companies like mine can make in this speech. And discuss also why I think entrepreneurship, more than anything else, is the best way to make a maximum impact in the world. And that traces back to how I started this company in the first place. Because it was at the end of my freshman year, after doing more of the same as I was doing in high school, chasing awards, trying to become in all these positions of responsibility in college, in my first year at Yale, and trying to become on the honor roll, winning awards, all that stuff. I realized that all those things were just stepping stones, means to an end rather than an end in itself. And in being students, and after that, in trying to enter the corporate world, my dream was to become an investment banking analyst after college. None of those things actually created that much real value. All of them were just about creating credentials for yourself so that you can build a really nice resume in hopes that one day, maybe 10 years from now, that would yield the results. And then I realized that the best way to make an impact in the world, and secondly, the best way for young people to climb the ladder as fast as they can, is through entrepreneurship. That and sports, where, for example, Roger Federer had won Wimbledon at the age of 20. Entertainment, where Justin Bieber had become a worldwide sensation just in his late teens. And entrepreneurship, where role models like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, had struck it really big in their early 20s. So when I turned 20, I had this quarter-life crisis and questioned why I was pursuing all those things I did. And so I took the advice of a Yale senior when I was a freshman who had started a startup company using satellite data to count the number of trees in the woodlands of America and sold that data to forestry companies. When he told me that the best opportunities out there are in unsexy industries, ones that have less saturation in terms of people pursuing, for example, digital media, restaurants, social media, online apps, all that stuff with tons of startups already. But industries like transportation, natural resources, agriculture, and energy had far too few entrepreneurs in them, and therefore had the greatest potential for disruption. So I spent that summer interning at Meralco and developed an interest for energy. At the same time, I invested all of my life savings into Solar City, a stock owned by of a company of Elon Musk, who many of you may know as the founder of Tesla Motors, the world's first successful electric car company, and SpaceX, the company that is now launching the world's first reusable spaceships with an aim to bring man to Mars in the next 10 years. Solar City pioneered the model of zero upfront pay-as-you-go solar, because the price of solar panels had gone down so much in the last 5 years that it had already become commercially viable to finance it for a customer, charging them zero upfront and selling them the power at a rate lower than the utility, amortizing the capex over the next 25 years. The numbers made sense in the US already, and I asked, why did they not make sense in the Philippines, where the cost of electricity was even twice as high? And when I was interning at Meralco, I asked all of these highly experienced business executives, MBAs, why hasn't anyone done solar rooftop installations in the Philippines at large scale yet? This was back in 2013, when there was a cumulative 4 megawatts of solar installations in the entire country. Today, there is almost 1,000 megawatts. And it turns out that that was a wave of installations that many of the big companies in the Philippines had missed. And the answer that I always got from these highly experienced business executives is something that they probably learned in MBA school, when they said that if it's such a good idea, why hadn't someone done it before? That cites a well-known concept in economics of efficient market hypothesis, by which it says that markets are informationally efficient. All of the good ideas have a proportionately large number of people going after them. So if it's a good idea, there's got to be a lot of people doing it. And if it's a bad idea, nobody's got to be doing it. Such that there's a joke that if there's two economists walking down Wall Street and they find a $100 bill lying on the street, one says, hey, isn't that a $100 bill? And the other says, if it were, someone would have picked it up. So I tested this hypothesis by trying to start this company despite the advice of many other people, and learned from some of the things that I saw from YouTube videos of watching my own business hero, Elon Musk, who had also started SpaceX despite the advice of people saying that rockets were too expensive to become commercially viable for manned space flight yet again. Because when he was trying to start his company, people were saying that a space rocket's got to cost $100 million. He went to the Soviet Union and tried to buy some of these old ICBMs from the Cold War and got some of those same prices from other people. But then he took apart the pieces of what comprised the rocket, canvassed them, and found out that the price has actually got to be just 1/5 of that amount. But because of so much bureaucracy, so much lack of innovation, the cost of building rocket ships was far higher than it ought to be. Likewise, in the Philippines before 2013, not only was the cost of solar panels just fundamentally a lot more expensive because of the younger technology back then, but moreover, there was not enough economies of scale in the local market. There wasn't a push in a chicken or the egg type of problem where, because no one had invested in a large system, there weren't that many people doing it locally, they hadn't gotten scale, and therefore couldn't get the costs down. And that there just weren't that many companies that saw that much of a big market to pursue outside of just doing a few novelty installations. I realized that the cost of solar panels should really be around half of what they were trading at in the Philippines at that time. So just that simple revelation was the key for why, according to some people, the financials just didn't work out, when in fact they were already very, very attractive back at that time. Just to show some pictures of some of our installations. This is our SM North EDSA 1.5 megawatts, installed on their rooftop, but exporting power into Meralco under the feed-in tariff program of the Department of Energy. This one, however, exporting power to the mall directly at a cost below what the mall is buying from Meralco, that they had purchased at zero upfront cost, just paying it as they go over a 25-year contract. And this one, owned by Robinsons on their Puerto Princesa branch, where they're offsetting even more expensive electricity in Paleco, in Palawan, where the local electric co-op has a higher rate because they're sourcing it from diesel, which is not just more expensive, but also more polluting to the environment. So one of the ideas that I'd also like to put forward is that there doesn't have to be some mutual exclusivity between the environment and business. You can do good by doing well. And moreover, the best way to do good is to do well. Because if you were just trying to build a solar enterprise to benefit maybe some marginalized communities, that's all noble stuff. But only by pursuing business can you achieve real scale. Do projects like these so that you can offset far more carbon emissions and then do positive things thereafter. But back then to the question of why there are so many of these opportunities that businesses overlook. One is that the businesses that have these resources often just aren't incentivized to pursue these opportunities. Business school people call that innovator's dilemma. So first, a business isn't incentivized to cannibalize its own business. If you're Meralco and you have a monopoly over the sale of electricity in the Philippines, or at least in Metro Manila, you have no incentive to try and introduce a new market that's just going to take away from the demand for electricity. But the second is, even if one of these companies had the foresight to try and disrupt themselves, oftentimes it's too late. Because these large publicly listed companies aren't just very slow and bureaucratic, but are also driven to meet their quarterly earnings targets. That's how much their executives' compensation is often even measured by, such that they aren't driven to make long-term bets that don't pay off in the short term. The exception that proves the rule is Google and Amazon. Google is known to now be diversifying out of search, which is still its bread and butter, investing billions of dollars into profit-losing enterprises like self-driving cars, which are forecasted to be commercially deployed in the next 2 or 3 years, far sooner than people had expected. Their self-driving car business is still making huge losses, but no doubt will make huge dividends in the next few years. History also rewards business people who see a huge market that many of the incumbents underestimate. In the 1860s, they discovered oil in Pennsylvania. Oil, something that was only used for lighting some household lighting back then. And other applications for oil, like automobiles, had yet to be invented. So the need for this market wasn't yet clear. And a lot of opportunistic businessmen went to Pennsylvania, tried to make a quick buck, didn't invest their profits into infrastructure, technology, pipelines, and refineries, didn't build a long-lasting organization. And when the price of oil crashed, when other oil wells were discovered, all of these businessmen went out of business, except for one by the name of John D. Rockefeller, whose company, Standard Oil, has come to become the most valuable company in history and the predecessor to ExxonMobil. There's a lot more opportunities like that out there, especially in markets like the Philippines, which are even more inefficient than ones in the developed world. More on that later. But the point here for everyone is that because all these incumbents are overlooking the next big thing, they create openings for young people and entrepreneurs to go for these and try and build scale before the incumbents wake up to the realization. Right now, the solar industry in the Philippines is already quite mature, and many people who have these resources in these large conglomerates finally realized, oh, this is a great opportunity, but it's already a bit too late. And oftentimes, that's the advantage that entrepreneurs have. That's also particularly applicable to young people, because if you want to enter into a new field of business, go into one where there's no competition, where there's no established players. If we went into general construction, for example, and we were 22-year-olds out of college, nobody would commission us to build a large project because there would be so many people who've been doing that for decades. But no one was doing solar at large scale 2 years ago. So after doing these solar rooftop projects, we've transitioned into doing solar farms. And just this week, actually, we are going to be energizing to the national grid the largest solar farm in the Philippines that's going to be supplying power for the entire western part of Batangas, the Batelec 1 franchise area. This is going to be displacing hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 per year, and more importantly, giving us a means to scale up our business and do more of this around the country. In my opinion, solar is not something that's just limited to subsidies. Our aim for this year is to build one of the largest projects that are unsubsidized in solar in the world. Because whereas in other countries, the cost of electricity is around 3 to 4 pesos per kilowatt hour, the costs of electricity here are double, if not triple. And why is that? Because while we source from the same coal mines, we source from the same gas sources as our neighboring countries, in the Philippines, there's only so few companies that monopolize the power industry. EPIRA had only caused our power prices to increase, and many of these companies actually collude to try and drive our prices higher. The fact that, for example, subsidies for solar are even contemplated in the Philippines confounds me. And that's something that I say contradictory to our own interests as a solar company, because I think that for this business to actually achieve real scale, it should be viable without subsidies. Because solar power is currently being sold in large markets like the US and China right now at 3 pesos per kilowatt hour. That is cheaper than the cost of coal in the Philippines, because coal in the Philippines is more expensive than coal nearly anywhere else. If that's the case, solar is not something for the future. Solar is something for today. Solar is already cheaper than every single operating power plant in the Philippines. That's not something anyone else in the power industry will tell you. But we'll prove it this year and steadily displace every single fossil fuel plant in this country, making the Philippines one of the world's first countries where solar provides a majority of the country's energy mix. Especially once batteries reach commercial viability, again thanks to the efforts of Elon Musk's Tesla. Solar will be able to displace not just peak time consumption, but nighttime. And again, the Philippines will be one of the first countries in the world where coal plants will be going offline because of cheap solar. You heard it here first. So, what does this mean then about everything outside of renewable energy? I'd like to underscore that we're living in one of the most exciting times in human history, because the pace of innovation isn't linear, it's exponential. 50 years ago, people didn't have the internet to have access to the world's information at their fingertips. 50 years ago, people didn't have mobile phones that could allow them to unlock so many other things, like Uber, the world's largest transportation company, now which doesn't own any cars. Airbnb, the world's largest hotel company, which doesn't own any real estate. These types of companies have been made possible, and their own innovations will allow for new avenues for your own innovations as well. Something that John F. Kennedy had made a point of when he announced that man was going to go to the moon in the 1960s, before anyone else thought that was possible. As he said, condense the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of 50 years. And in these terms, we know very little about what happened in the first 40 years. Only that at the end of them, 10 years ago, man emerged from his caves. Only 5 years ago, man invented writing and the wheel. Christianity only began 2 years ago. The printing press only this year. Less than 2 months ago, the steam engine. And last month, electric lights, automobiles, and the airplane. Only last year, by this standard, did television and nuclear power become available. And at that time, that if man had put a man on the moon, it would have just been midnight of that very same day. 50 years later, and the pace of innovation is even far, far greater. And those of us who are of this generation shall only yield those dividends. So, I end this speech by saying that the future is so exciting. Renewable energy is just one way in which we can really disrupt traditional industries. And I think that being in the Philippines gives us this globally important and a unique opportunity to do that in one of the places where solar without subsidies is commercially viable first. So knowing the audience in today's event, I also wanted to mention that we're hiring lots of positions, business development, sales, marketing, accounting, legal, etc. We have 175 people in the company right now, but if we want to just replace all the coal plants in the Philippines with solar and do it in a financially viable way, please email us. Thank you very much.